For decades, the world operated on a powerful and alluring idea: globalization. In its simplest form, this was the belief that we were all becoming more connected. Money, goods, and ideas could travel across borders with unprecedented freedom, creating a single global marketplace. This interconnectedness promised to lift nations out of poverty, foster greater understanding between cultures, and make the world a more prosperous and peaceful place. By allowing countries to specialize in what they do best and trade with others, the theory went, everyone would benefit from lower prices, greater choice, and rapid economic growth. This was the engine that powered the global economy for much of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a force that seemed, well, pretty much unstoppable. The results of this grand experiment were, for a time, truly remarkable. We saw the dramatic rise of economies across Asia, particularly China, which lifted hundreds of millions of its citizens out of poverty by becoming the world's factory. Consumers in the West enjoyed an abundance of affordable products, from electronics to clothing, all made possible by intricate global supply chains that stretched across continents. This system was built on a foundation of international cooperation, governed by institutions like the World Trade Organization, which set the rules for this new global game. The assumption was that as nations became more economically intertwined, their political interests would also align, reducing the likelihood of major conflicts. However, this golden age of globalization also contained the seeds of its own undoing. The very efficiency that made the system so productive also made it fragile. The seamless flow of goods and capital meant that a crisis in one part of the world, like the financial meltdown of 2008, could rapidly spread and infect the entire global economy. Furthermore, the benefits of this interconnectedness were not always shared equally. While corporations and skilled professionals often thrived, many working-class communities in Western nations felt left behind. They watched as factories closed and jobs moved overseas, leading to a growing sense of economic anxiety and resentment against a system that seemed to favor distant elites over local communities. This growing discontent began to bubble up to the surface, challenging the core assumptions that had underpinned the global order for so long. The narrative of inevitable progress started to fray, replaced by a rising tide of skepticism and a yearning for a return to something more familiar and secure. People began to question whether the relentless pursuit of economic efficiency had come at too high a social and political cost. The promise of a borderless world, once seen as a beacon of progress, started to look more like a threat to national identity, economic stability, and the livelihoods of ordinary citizens. This shift in public sentiment would ultimately set the stage for a dramatic rethinking of our interconnected world. The once sturdy edifice of globalization is now showing deep and undeniable cracks. A primary driver of this change has been the dramatic shift in the global balance of power, most notably the rise of China. When China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, the hope in the West was that economic integration would lead to political liberalization. Instead, China leveraged its access to global markets to become an economic superpower, but it did so without adopting Western democratic values. As of 2025, it now stands as a powerful competitor to the United States, creating a rivalry that is reshaping trade, technology, and international relations. This has led to a fundamental reassessment, particularly in Washington, about the wisdom of deep economic interdependence with a strategic rival. Simultaneously, technological advancements like automation and artificial intelligence are transforming industries and labor markets within nations themselves. The same technologies that promised to boost productivity also stoked fears of mass job displacement. For many workers, the threat was no longer just a factory moving to another country, it was a robot or an algorithm taking their job right at home. This anxiety has fueled a powerful political backlash against the perceived excesses of globalization. It has become easier for populist leaders to blame foreign trade and immigration for domestic economic problems, even when technological change is a significant, if not larger, contributor. This has created a fertile ground for nationalist sentiments to flourish. This growing economic insecurity has naturally led to a greater desire for control over national borders and economies. The idea of reshoring or onshoring, bringing manufacturing and critical supply chains back home, has gained significant political traction. The COVID-19 pandemic starkly illustrated the vulnerabilities of relying on distant suppliers for essential goods like medical equipment and pharmaceuticals, accelerating this trend. Countries no longer want to be in a position where their national security or public health is dependent on the whims of another government. This has led to a pivot away from pure economic efficiency and toward a new emphasis on national resilience and self-sufficiency, even if it means higher costs for consumers. The political will to maintain the old globalist order has also eroded. Since the election of Donald Trump in 2024, the United States, once the primary architect and defender of the liberal international system, has adopted a more nationalist and protectionist stance. This America First approach, characterized by tariffs and a retreat from multilateral agreements, has signaled to the world that the old rules no longer apply. This has created a vacuum in global leadership and has encouraged other nations to pursue their own interests more aggressively. The shared consensus that once held the global system together has fractured, leaving a more competitive and unpredictable international landscape in its wake. As the universal principles of globalization recede, the world is reorganizing itself along new lines. We are entering an era defined not by open integration, but by strategic competition and selective cooperation. The most prominent feature of this new landscape is the emergence of distinct geopolitical and economic blocs, primarily centered around the United States and China. These are not formal alliances like those of the Cold War, but rather spheres of influence defined by trade patterns, technological standards, and security partnerships. Countries are increasingly being pushed to choose sides, and supply chains are being reconfigured to operate within these friendly blocs, a process often referred to as friendshoring. This shift inevitably leads to a rise in economic nationalism and protectionism. Governments are now more willing than ever to use tariffs, subsidies, and regulations to protect domestic industries and gain an advantage over their rivals. The focus is shifting from global free trade to managed trade, where economic relationships are carefully curated to serve national security and strategic objectives. We see this in the intense competition over critical technologies like semiconductors, 5G, and artificial intelligence, where nations are actively working to block rivals from accessing key components and knowledge. This creates a decoupling in the tech world, potentially leading to a splintered internet and competing technological ecosystems. This fracturing is also likely to lead to increased regionalization. Instead of a single global market, we may see the strengthening of regional trading areas, such as the European Union, the North American bloc under USMCA, and a potential East Asian bloc centered on China. Companies may shorten their supply chains, preferring to produce and sell goods within a single region to avoid the risks associated with long-distance transoceanic trade in a politically tense world. While this might increase the resilience of regional economies, it could also reduce global efficiency and lead to higher prices for consumers, as the benefits of worldwide specialization are lost. It marks a clear retreat from the flat world vision of the early 2000s. For nations caught in the middle, this new era presents a complex challenge. Many countries, particularly middle powers like India, Brazil, and Turkey, do not wish to be forced into a binary choice between Washington and Beijing. They are instead pursuing a strategy of strategic autonomy, attempting to maintain relationships with both blocs to maximize their own flexibility and influence. This creates a multi-nodal, more complicated world order where alliances are fluid and transactional. The result is a less predictable global environment, where cooperation on major international issues becomes more difficult to achieve as nations prioritize their own narrower interests or those of their chosen bloc. As we stand at this historic inflection point, the future of the international order is not a single, predetermined path, but a series of competing possibilities. One potential future is a world of entrenched blocs, a geopolitical G2 dominated by the ongoing rivalry between the United States and China. In this scenario, global cooperation on pressing issues like climate change, pandemics, and nuclear proliferation would become exceedingly difficult. Each side would view such issues through the lens of zero-sum competition, hindering any meaningful progress. International institutions would become paralyzed by gridlock, and the world would be a more dangerous and less stable place, defined by suspicion and constant strategic maneuvering. A second, perhaps more optimistic possibility is the emergence of what could be called multilateralism 2.0. In this vision, Nations recognize that despite their rivalries, certain global challenges are simply too large to be ignored or solved alone. They might forge new, more flexible coalitions to tackle specific problems, bypassing the gridlocked institutions of the old order. For instance, a climate coalition could bring together Europe, parts of Asia, and various subnational actors in the US to push for decarbonization, even without formal global treaties. This future would be messier and less cohesive than the old system, but it would preserve a space for pragmatic, issue-based cooperation in a fragmented world. A third path is one of greater fragmentation and inward focus, a world where nations increasingly turn their backs on international cooperation altogether. Driven by populist pressures and a desire for self-reliance, countries could double down on protectionism, leading to a significant decoupling of economies. This would likely result in slower global economic growth, reduced innovation, and higher costs for everyone. While this path might offer a short-term sense of security and control for some, it would leave the world dangerously ill-equipped to handle the next global crisis, whether it be a new pandemic, a financial collapse, or an environmental catastrophe. It is a future of isolated islands in a turbulent global sea. Understanding these profound shifts is not merely an academic exercise, it is essential for every citizen, business leader, and policymaker. The changes underway will directly impact the cost of goods, the availability of jobs, the security of nations, and our collective ability to solve humanity's most urgent problems. The era of easy, frictionless globalization is over. What replaces it will be shaped by the choices we make today. Navigating this new, more complex world will require a clear-eyed understanding of the forces at play and a renewed debate about what kind of global order we wish to build for the future. The stakes could not be higher.